Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
عراقيا قتل مسلحون يرتدون زي الجيش العراقي بالرصاص زعيما قبليا عمره 70 عاما.
Armed men wearing Iraqi army uniforms killed a 70-year-old man and his 4 sons while they were sleeping in their home at night in the capital of Baghdad. The U.S. forces in Iraq announced that nearly 200 Iraqi soldiers and 250 U.S. Marines began Operation Lion in the area of Tamim, south of Ramadi, west of Baghdad.
بمنطقة تميم جنوب الرمادي غرب العاصمة العراقية بغداد.
The funeral that was taking place in a home in the Hurriya neighborhood in the capital of Baghdad was transformed by screams and cries of terrified shock. 5 people from the same family were killed when armed men wearing the Iraqi army uniform killed a 70-year-old man and 4 of his sons during the night, turning it into a nightmare.
They attacked us and killed my father. My brother, who's 16 years old, was also killed. My brother had a machine gun defending us, and they shot his arm off. My brother's a police officer. He was upstairs. My third brother was also killed. I was holding my daughter in my lap.
An official in the Ministry of Defense hurried to deny that the Iraqi forces were involved in a killing. However, an official from the Interior Ministry said that 40 armed men wearing army uniforms went to the home of the victims and were responsible for their murder.
This is the blood of my brother and father. They worked for the National Guard.
في غضون ذلك جرح مدنيان عراقيان في انفجار قنبلة ذرعت بوسط بغداد قبل أن تمر قافلة.
Meanwhile, 2 Iraqi civilians were killed by a bomb that went off in the center of Baghdad before an Iraqi military convoy passed. It appeared as though the explosive device that was targeting Iraqi and U.S. forces went off only seconds before the convoy arrived. Tikrit, the birthplace of ousted President Saddam Hussein, was the scene of a mortar attack during a ceremony that transferred to Iraqi authorities control of a palace that belonged to the former President Saddam Hussein. A source on the Iraqi police said that the attack took place near the site of the ceremony, injuring 1 person and creating a wave of fear among the participants, including the American ambassador to Iraq, Zalimeh Khalilzad, and the American Supreme Commander for the U.S. forces, General George Casey. The American ambassador and his bodyguards fearfully rushed inside one of the buildings before he returned to his seat at the ceremony.
قبل أن يعود لمكان الاحتفال.
Good afternoon. Israeli planes dropped thousands of leaflets over Beirut today, warning Lebanese that Hezbollah wanted to destroy Lebanon 2 days after fierce clashes between Israeli forces and the armed group. Israeli Foreign Minister Silvan Shalom said the situation in Lebanon could no longer continue in reference to Hezbollah's refusal to disarm. Shalom would try to convince the European community to add Hezbollah to its list of terrorist organizations during a Euromed summit at the end of the month in Barcelona. France also condemned the border clashes and called on all parties to avoid escalation. Its foreign ministry also slammed violations of the Blue Line, notably the continuous Israeli violation of Lebanese sovereignty. Iran, a staunch ally of Hezbollah, condemned what it called aggression from the Zionist regime against Lebanon's sovereignty. The latest border violence cost the lives of 4 Hezbollah fighters. The remains of 3 of the fighters were in Israel's hands. Yumna Tayyara has the story.
The leaflets, which parachuted from Israeli helicopters in the early hours of the morning and which were written in Arabic, read, quote, "Who lies to you? Who sends your sons into battle unprepared?" The leaflets, which were signed, "The State of Israel," added, quote, "Hezbollah is causing enormous harm to Lebanon." Witnesses said that jets dropped the leaflets over Beirut and several towns in South Lebanon in the early hours of Wednesday. Israel had previously used this tactic after past clashes with Hezbollah, but it was the first time in many years the leaflets had been dropped so close to the center of Lebanese capital. Hours earlier, around 5,000 members of the pro-Syrian Hezbollah group took part in the funeral march yesterday for fighter Youssef Barakat. The funeral was held in the Zibkin area of South Lebanon. The 27-year-old Barakat was killed during clashes between Hezbollah and Israeli forces on Monday in the disputed Shib'a Farms area. His wife joined the mourners with his young son, who held a picture of his father. Hezbollah raided North Israel in what Lebanese security sources said was a botched attempt to capture Israeli troops on Monday, triggering the worst round of fighting since Israel pulled out of South Lebanon 5 years ago. But Hezbollah blamed Israel for provoking the clashes, saying its fighters had attacked the Israeli patrol only after it strayed across the UN-demarcated frontier into Lebanese territory. Hezbollah was instrumental in ending the Jewish state's 20-year occupation of South Lebanon. Hezbollah said 4 of its fighters were killed. Israeli security sources said 11 Israelis, mostly soldiers, were wounded. Israel claimed it wanted calm along its border, but threatened it knew how to retaliate. In Washington, the U.S. State Department said the attack was further evidence Lebanon needed to implement a UN resolution calling for the disarming of anti-Israel armed factions. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan deplored the deadly exchange of fire, blaming the Lebanese side for initiating the clash. Annan reiterated his call for the government of Lebanon to extend its authority over all of its territory in accordance with Security Council resolutions. Premier Fuad Sinura blamed the Jewish state for the latest clashes, saying that Israeli aircraft have never stopped violating Lebanese airspace in the past weeks, fueling tension at the frontier.
Tzachi Hanegbi is perceived by the public as the most corrupt minister in the government. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon ranks 5th. This according to a newly released poll presented yesterday at the Sderot Conference for Society. Well, who else finds their name on this dubious list? We'll learn that from IBA's Efrat Batat.
The public believes the level of corruption in Israel has reached an all-time high. This emerges from a survey on who the public views as the cabinet's most corrupt ministers. The poll, conducted by the Ma'agar Mochot Research and Interdisciplinary Institute, was presented yesterday at the annual Sderot Conference for Society. It listed Prime Minister Ariel Sharon as the 5th most corrupt person in the ruling echelon. Sharon was preceded by his number 2 aide, Finance Minister Ehud Olmert, who followed Education Minister Limor Livnat. Sitting comfortably in the number 2 spot is Minister of Agriculture, Israel Katz, and topping the list of who the public perceives as the most corrupt leading figure is former Minister of Internal Security, Tzachi Hanegbi, who in the past also served as Justice Minister. MK Omri Sharon, the Prime Minister's son, was crowned as the most corrupt member of the Knesset, followed by Shas MK Shlomo Ben Izri, Binyamin Netanyahu, and Roni Bar-On. The only 2 cabinet ministers who emerged somewhat clean in the public eyes are Housing Minister Yitzhak Herzog and Justice Minister Tzipi Livni, who are viewed by the public as the least dishonest ministers. Over 90% of those surveyed view the use of public funds for personal purposes as the most unethical act. Reserve Major General Uzi Dayan, the president of the Sderot Conference for Society, said that corruption poses the worst threat to society, even more dangerous than terror.
Government corruption and what to do about it. Joining me now in the studio with some answers is attorney Michael Partum with the Movement for Quality Government. Michael, welcome.
Hey.
Is corruption worse today than in the past, or is it just a case of better reporting?
I think there is certainly a perception that corruption is worse than it was in the past. There is a perception that the ethical standards of the Founding Fathers no longer apply to today's public officials. Whether in fact things are much worse, I'm not 100% certain. I do feel, however, that the perception is certainly there and people are less tolerant. And I think there is a deeper understanding how corruption harms a society, how it harms the economy, how it demoralizes people who are looking for equal opportunities.
Your organization, the Movement for Quality Government, has several proposals drawn up for cleaning up government. Can you just quickly summarize those?
It's obvious to us that it's not just a matter of the people, that there are structural reforms necessary. hopefully the public in the upcoming elections will make its voice heard and demand from the elected officials structural reforms.
Many Iraqis expressed their optimism regarding the Conference of National Reconciliation. They believe that this summit is an important step towards healing the country and pushing it forward. However, some politicians were pessimistic about it because they believe there are lots of problems that still need to be worked out. Here is Reem Zaid in the following report. Amidst a state of confusion, many Iraqi political groups and parties resumed their scheduled meetings at the National Reconciliation Conference.
Some of the reasons that the conference is ambiguous are because it does not have clear agendas. This poses the question of why those officials could not come back to Iraq.
Many Iraqi politicians expressed their doubt that this conference will put an end to the violence that has been sweeping Iraq for more than 2 years.
This conference will not resolve any current problems in the country because Iraq is full of sectarian problems and conflicts. There are some people or groups who are behind these conflicts. The Arab League does not have enough information on these types of sectarian conflicts, and even if it has the information, it will not be able to resolve these problems.
However, some Iraqis expressed their optimism, hoping that this conference will be the beginning of the end of many problems in Iraq.
Although the conference is overdue and should have come a long time ago, we hope that it will contribute to resolving the problems in Iraq.
The Iraqi people are in dire need of this conference, which is taking place as we speak in Cairo. We support anything that will unite the Iraqis.
We hope that this reconciliation conference will unite all Iraqi factions and groups, but I would like to clarify something. I hope that this convention is not like the Saudi conference on Lebanon, which divided rather than united the Lebanese people. I hope it will not divide us further between Sunnis, Shiites, and Kurds.
Iraqi politicians were pessimistic about the outcome of this conference. However, average Iraqis were optimistic that it will give them hope and unity. Reem Zaid, Sumeria Channel, Baghdad.
The Sudanese Vice President Ali Othman Taha announced the creation of an economic partnership between his government and investors from 8 Arab countries who participated in an investors meeting, the first of its kind, in the state of Jazeera in central Sudan.
The state of Jazeera in central Sudan hosts one of the largest agricultural projects in the world. And in the capital of Wad Mad, it welcomed a major investment meeting with the participation of more than 550 Arab investors from 8 countries: Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Kuwait, Egypt, Palestine, the United Arab Emirates, as well as Arab businessmen and their Sudanese counterparts. They came to find opportunities in agriculture, manufacturing, and commercial investments in the central Sudanese state of Jazeera. Also at the meeting was the Minister of Investment in the National Unity Government, as well as the Governor of the state of Jazeera, and the Vice President of the Republic, Ali Othman Muhammad Taha, who announced the creation of a partnership based on the mutual interests of the government and the investors.
The Sudanese today have opened their doors widely and extended open arms to their Arab brothers to establish partnerships.
The investment meeting for Arab businessmen was the first of its kind in the state of Jazeera, whose government believes that simplifying and facilitating investments, especially for foreigners, is the shortest path towards bringing the maximum amount of investments from investors and Arab capitalists, compelling it to create a national agency to liaison between the Jazeera state and businessmen.
We have a plan now to achieve 2 or 3 objectives in coordination with our brothers in the United Arab Emirates, and we are expanding to Egypt and Iran. We have another plan with our brothers in the Saudi Kingdom. These plans are a priority for Sudan. This meeting is the first of its kind, and God willing, there will be others.
The foreign and national investors see the climate of investment in the Sudanese state of Jazeera as an attraction, especially if the government follows through with its promise to facilitate these transactions, particularly in the state of Jazeera, which is more unique than other Sudanese states.
Arab businessmen coming from various Arab countries are looking at the investment experience in Sudan, and they give their comments, whether they are positive or not, in order to serve Arab economy in general. The same opportunities are available for foreign investors and Sudanese investors.
Jazeera hosted the first investment meeting of Arab businessmen, perhaps opening the door to wide-scale investment. For the Sudanese to bring in Arab capital in a step aimed at returning confidence among foreign investors by creating suitable investment conditions in Sudan.
Professor Rabi Hafiz, many people say that there is no sectarianism in Iraq and that what they are going through is only temporary. They say that there were no problems between the Shiites and the Sunnis in the past. But I feel that this is wrong. It is impossible for sectarianism to come from nowhere, and all of a sudden. It seems that sectarianism was always there, but it was hidden.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هذا صحيح، والكلام الذي أدلى به الإخوة كذلك صحيح، ولكن أنا أود أن أرجع.
In the name of God, the passionate and merciful, what you are saying is true, but allow me to go back in history so we can look at the big picture. First, in our Arabic and Islamic civilization, we did not have the concept of ethnic minorities. Minorities in the Arab and Islamic civilization were rather identified on the basis of religion and ways of thinking, which was not a shameful thing.
وليس ذلك عيبا. قضية أخرى أنك لو نظرت إلى المنطقة العربية لرأيتها أنها من أكثر.
الأقلية أن تتحدث بالمنطق الديني.
Are you referring to the Christian minority versus the Muslim majority, and the Kurds versus the Arabs and the Berbers?
لا، أنا قلت في مفهوم الحضارة العربية الإسلامية، يعني إحنا نتكلم الآن مو نتكلم عن السنوات العشر الأخيرة والعشرين أو العقدين الثلاثين، نتكلم عن 14 قرن.
I am not talking about the last 10 or 20 or even 30 years. I am talking about the 1400 years of Arabic and Islamic civilization, which strongly influenced the world.
وتركي. بالعكس، أصلا العرب لم يحكموا منذ 9 قرون أو من 8 قرون. تبوأوا مقعدا سياسيا خلفيا.
In this civilization, people did not identify themselves as Arabs, Turks, or Kurds. Arabs did not rule for more than 700 or 800 years. Rather, they took over secondary positions behind Kurdish, Persian, and Albanian leaders.
أنه الفسيفسائية العربية، الفسيفسائية المنطقة هذه من أكثر فسيفسائيات العالم تعقيدا.
What I'm trying to say is that the ethnic and religious diversity in the Arab region is the most complicated diversity in the world. It was the center where many civilizations met. However, this diversity was the reason behind the rise of the Arabic and Islamic civilization, which enlightened the entire world. This happened at a time when diversity in Europe was the reason behind civil wars. Non-Arab and non-Muslim groups were part of the organic society of the Arabic and Islamic civilization, and they played active roles.
الرعاية من غير العرب ومن غير المسلمين مو فقط عاشوا فيها وإنما كانوا فاعلين، يعني إحنا ليس كأمريكا.
This is not different from what is happening in America, where Arabs, Russians, and Argentinians who work in NASA, for example, are in effect benefiting the American civilization. In the Arab and Islamic civilization, many famous scholars were also non-Arabs. Abu Hanifa was Persian, Abu Bukhari was Turkish, and Salah ad-Din was Kurdish. Thus, the diversity was a motivational force behind the 1400 years of civilization.
عن تعريف المجتمع استطاعت أن تقلبها إلى حضارة متماسكة دامت 14 قرن. قبل الصديق
Arabs and non-Arabs give the Islamic civilization a Legion of Honor for its tolerance of other religious, sectarian and ethnic groups. For example, Christians had lived among Muslims for almost 14 or 15 centuries without problems. They were allowed to keep their churches and religious traditions.
استقبلت كانت حلا لحضارات أخرى أوروبا حتى لو لم تكن حضارة عندما طردت أوروبا اليهود استقبلهم النظام السياسي لهذه الحضارة من العثمانيين.
This civilization prospered when other civilizations collapsed. When the Europeans drove the Jews out of Europe, the political system of the Islamic civilization, the Ottoman Empire, received them with open arms. Even when the political system of this Islamic empire disappeared, the social system embraced many waves of ethnic migrations, such as the Armenians, who are neither Arabs nor Muslims. The Armenians in Iraq today stand in lines waiting for bread with other Iraqis, without fearing discrimination or racism. We are talking about a social system within the Islamic civilization, which contains many ethnicities and minorities living with the majority in harmony. The majority was not involved in conflicts with the minorities. Within the framework of this social system of the Islamic civilization, minority groups needed the majority for protection and support. When this political system of the Islamic and Arab civilizations collapsed, it caused many of the ethnic groups to fight one another. This political system was holding the different ethnic and sectarian groups together in what seemed like a mosaic. So when it collapsed, these groups, such as the Arabs, the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Kurds, the Christians, and the Jews, broke away from its core and engaged in conflicts and fights. Consequently, the entire region lost the unique characteristics of its Islamic civilization and its political system, which held all these sectarian groups together.
عندما غاب النظام السياسي السائد.
Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad met with the visiting Afghan Foreign Minister Abdullah Abdullah on Wednesday, when he emphasized that Iran is ready to do what it takes to see its eastern neighbor a secure, mighty, developed nation. The Afghan Foreign Minister, for his part, said the aid Iran is offering to Afghanistan can greatly contribute to stability and security in that country. At the end of the meeting, the two sides signed an MOU that envisages a joint high commission for border issues. Tehran and Kabul took up bilateral discussions reviewing ways to promote regional and international cooperation. Iranian Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki told his Afghan counterpart, Abdullah, that Iran is supporting peace in Afghanistan, adding the signature of Iran-Afghanistan agreement will remove trade problems faced by the pair. The pair also discussed ways to eradicate illicit drugs. On his part, the Afghan side called for expansion of all-out ties with Tehran. Later on, foreign ministers of Iran and Afghanistan held a joint press conference where Manouchehr Mottaki spoke of possible nuclear talks with the European trio after the upcoming gathering of the IAEA Board of Governors slated for December the 15th. Mottaki also said Iran has officially received no offer for talks from Europe, adding, however, in a phone talk with British Jack Straw, Tehran and London agreed to resume talks, but yet place and date for talks still remains a question. Mottaki also underlined there has been no discussion outside Iran on Tehran's uranium enrichment. The top diplomat termed impossible the suspension of Isfahan nuclear activities. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad told the parliament on Wednesday that serious measures must be taken by the government to eradicate poverty and enforce justice in the Iranian society. The president said in a report to the chamber that microeconomic activities top the government agenda, adding efforts must be focused on exports, which play a significant role in the national economy. Referring to a nuclear tender scheme proposed in UN General Assembly, Ahmadinejad said the move has received a broad welcome by many countries.
حصل
After his meeting with the Chinese president, the American president, George Bush, pledged to work on a plan to reduce his country's trade deficit in favor of China. He also urged the Chinese government to promote freedom and human rights. Bush's remarks, including his comments on the independence of Taiwan, were ignored by Chinese officials. The Chinese and the American administrations agreed that both countries could not agree on everything. However, they share mutual interest and common ground, so they must keep the channels of communication open to negotiate and work out their differences peacefully, not only for their own country's interests, but also for the interest of the entire world. George Bush is riding his bicycle through rocky mountain roads in one of the suburbs of the Chinese capital, Beijing. It seems as if he needed his workout prior to his meeting with Chinese officials. China is a developing country with massive economic capacity and political stability. The U.S. realizes that as tough as Beijing may seem towards some countries, it is in its best interest to attract those countries to do business with it. During his negotiations with the Chinese president, Hu Jintao, in the People's Hall, the American president called on China to grant more religion, political, and social freedoms. However, the Chinese president seemed as if he were not interested.
It is important.
It is important that religion, political, and social freedoms expand and proceed forward in China. We encourage China to continue its historical path to democracy.
In a speech given before Sunday worshippers in the Gangwashel Protestant Church, Bush bluntly urged Communist China to grant more religious freedom. Moreover, he criticized Beijing of human rights violations and its rigid policy against opposition groups. However, the People's Republic of China brushed off Bush's comments, confirming that the U.S. is only trying to meddle in its internal affairs. Chinese officials believe that it is the policy of the American neoconservatives to weaken China and keep it under scrutiny.
Beijing is working on raising the level of human rights enjoyed by the Chinese people. However, we must proceed with caution because it must conform to political and social conditions in China. Our country will adopt democratic policies, but in a Chinese fashion.
Trade is another topic discussed between the American president and his counterpart, the Chinese president. American legislators and business entrepreneurs called on Mr. Bush to impose economic restrictions on China because of China's huge export into a demanding U.S. market. Chinese trade surplus is estimated to reach $200 billion this year. The surplus is not caused only by the devaluation of the Chinese currency, the yen, but it also has to do with Beijing's imitation of American products in Chinese markets. The American concern about the Chinese trade was accepted with good spirits by Beijing. To show goodwill, the Chinese have signed a contract with the American Boeing company to purchase 70 737 aircraft for $4 billion. The contract was intended to alleviate some of the American anxiety regarding the discrepancy of its trade balance. However, the Chinese did not offer any concessions as requested by President Bush regarding the problem of Taiwan. Such concessions, which may benefit Taiwan in seeking independence from China, were rejected bluntly by Chinese officials who consider Taiwan part of China. Beijing will not give up Taiwan and will only grant it autonomy or self-rule. The Chinese firm stance in Taiwan was expected by U.S. officials. However, Washington urged China to resolve Taiwanese problems carefully. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice voiced her concern regarding overhauling and modernizing the Chinese army, which is considered to be the largest combat force in the world. Washington, which always sought to keep military equilibrium in the region by arming Taiwan, is now worried that China will cause a military imbalance.
من اختلال بتوازن عسكري سعت دائما إلى إقامته في المنطقة بتسليح تايوان.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.